He stood in front of her with a cup of chamomile tea, gently stirring honey into it, like a devoted husband, like a man who loved his pregnant wife enough to care about her sleep, her stress, her fragile body carrying his child. He even blew on it twice before handing it to her, smiling softly, while his mother watched from the doorway with cold approval. What neither of them knew was that for the past 30 nights, she had been switching their cups in silence, and tonight, as his hands trembled slightly and his eyes lost focus. For just a second too long, she realized something terrifying. He wasn't just trying to make her sleep. He was trying to make her disappear. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It had started quietly, the kind of quiet that made her doubt herself before she ever doubted him. Elena had been 7 months pregnant when the exhaustion first began to feel wrong. Not the normal kind, the kind other women warned her about, but something heavier, something that sank into her bones and stayed there. She would wake up late in the morning, her head pounding, her thoughts slow and slippery, like she was trying to hold on to something that kept dissolving in her hands. And every single morning, Adrian was there, standing by the bed, smiling, holding a fresh cup of coffee. "You were out all night," he would say gently, brushing her hair away from her face. "You didn't even move." She believed him. At first, he had always been attentive, protective, especially after they got married and moved into his mother's house temporarily, which had quietly turned into something permanent. His mother, Lydia, had insisted it was better for the baby. Safer, more controlled. Elena remembered the way Lydia would watch her at dinner, her eyes lingering on her belly, like it was something she didn't fully approve of. "You look tired," Lydia would say, her voice sweet but sharp underneath. "Pregnancy is already affecting your mind. You forget things too easily." At first, Elena laughed it off. Then her things started disappearing. Her necklace, her father's watch, small items at first, then larger ones. When she asked Adrian, he would sigh, concerned, almost disappointed. "You need to start writing things down," he told her one night. "You're scaring me." That was when the doubt crept in. Not about him, about herself. Until one afternoon, everything shifted. She wasn't looking for anything suspicious. She had dropped her phone and bent down to pick it up near Adrian's gym bag. The zipper was half open. Something inside caught the light. A small glass vial. Blue. Thick liquid. No label. Her heart didn't race right away. It just stopped. Later that night, when he brought her the tea, she didn't drink it. She watched him, waited, and when he turned his back for just a second, she switched the cups. The next morning, for the first time in weeks, she woke up before him, clear-headed, sharp, watching him sleep far deeper than he ever had before. That was the moment everything inside her shifted. Not fear, not panic, understanding. So she kept going. One night, 2 nights, a week, a month. Every night she swapped the cups. Every morning she watched him a little more carefully. And tonight, standing in that kitchen with his mother's eyes quietly judging her, from across the room she saw it clearly. His hands were shaking just slightly as he lifted the cup. His smile came a second too late, and for the first time since this began, he looked confused. Elena lowered her eyes, hiding the cold calm settling deep inside her chest. Because now she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was waiting, and something told her Adrian wasn't working alone. The next morning, Elena didn't wait to see if it was real. She sat at the kitchen table before sunrise, her hands wrapped around a cup of plain water, watching Adrian from across the room as he leaned against the counter, staring down at his phone longer than usual. His movements were slower, almost delayed, like his body was struggling to keep up with his thoughts. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked softly. He blinked like the question had to travel through fog before reaching him. Yeah, I think so." His voice didn't sound like his. It lacked that steady, controlled warmth he always carried. Elena tilted her head, studying him with the same concern he had shown her for weeks. "You seem tired." "I'm fine," he said quickly, too quickly. Then he frowned, rubbing his temple. "Just a headache." She lowered her gaze, hiding the flicker of something colder than fear. It was working. For the first time, she wasn't guessing anymore. She had spent the past month documenting everything quietly. The way he spoke, the way he moved, the messages he sent when he thought she was asleep. She had started using her phone in silence, recording short clips, capturing fragments that didn't seem important at first until they started forming a pattern. And now the pattern was shifting. Adrian wasn't just slipping, he was unraveling. Later that afternoon, while he was upstairs resting, something he never did before, Elena stood alone in the living room, her phone in her hand, replaying a recording she had taken 2 nights ago. It was short, barely 20 seconds, but it was enough. Adrian's voice, low controlled. "She's getting worse. The memory gaps are longer now." A pause, another voice, distant, filtered through the speaker. "Female. Good. The lawyer said we need at least 2 more weeks of consistent symptoms. Then we can move forward." Elena's fingers tightened around the phone. 2 more weeks. She hadn't noticed it before, not really. The way he would step outside to take calls. The way he lowered his voice. The way he always said we. Now she heard it clearly. He wasn't alone. A soft sound behind her made her turn. Lydia stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Her eyes fixed on Elena, like she had been watching for a while. "You shouldn't be standing for too long," Lydia said calmly, her voice carrying that same sweet edge that always made Elena's stomach tighten. "It's not good for the baby." Elena forced a small smile, lowering her phone. "I'm fine." Lydia stepped closer, her gaze dropping briefly to Elena's belly, before returning to her face. "Adrian told me you've been forgetful lately." There it was again. That word, carefully planted, repeated, reinforced. Elena felt it pressing in from all sides now, the narrative they were building around her, the version of her they were creating for everyone else. Unstable, weak, unreliable. "I'm just tired," Elena said quietly. Lydia's lips curved into something that almost looked like sympathy. "Of course you are. Pregnancy can do terrible things to a woman's mind. That's why you need people to take care of you, to make decisions for you." Elena held her gaze, something inside her. Tightening, not fear, not anymore, but something sharper. "You mean Adrian," she said. Lydia's smile didn't change. Who else would it be? That night, Elena didn't just switch the cups. She watched him drink, every second of it. Adrian swallowed slowly, his eyes flicking toward her, searching her face like he was trying to read something that wasn't there before. For a brief moment, something like confusion passed through his expression. Then it was gone. By the time he set the cup down, his hand was trembling again. And this time he noticed it. "What's wrong with me?" he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to her. Elena didn't answer. She just sat there, her hands resting gently over her belly, feeling the faint movement of her child beneath her skin. Because now she knew 2 things. First, whatever he had been giving her, it was enough to break a person slowly. And second, he wasn't the only one waiting for her to fall apart. Somewhere out there, someone else was counting down the days. And she had no idea yet who that woman really was. Dinner that night felt like a performance Elena had never agreed to be part of. The table was set perfectly as always. Linen napkins, polished silverware. Lydia's signature roasted chicken placed at the center, like something sacred. To anyone else, it would have looked like a normal family meal. Warm, stable, controlled. But Elena could feel it now, the weight behind every glance, every word. Adrian barely touched his food. He sat across from her shoulders, slightly slumped, blinking slower than usual. Once he reached for his glass and missed it by an inch before correcting himself, glancing around quickly as if hoping no one had noticed. Lydia noticed everything. She dabbed her lips with a napkin, her gaze flicking between them before settling on Elena. "You didn't take your afternoon nap," she said calmly. Elena paused mid-bite. "I wasn't tired. That's not what Adrian told me." Lydia tilted her head, studying her. "You've been forgetting your routines lately." There it was again, that careful rewriting of reality. Elena forced a small, uncertain smile, lowering her eyes just enough to look convincing. "Maybe I have." Adrian let out a quiet breath, rubbing his forehead. "She's been worse this week," he said, his voice strained, like even speaking required effort. "She asked me the same question 3 times this morning." Elena's chest tightened. She remembered that moment. She had done it on purpose. But hearing him say it like that, like she was already gone, made something cold twist inside her ribs. I didn't realize, she said softly, playing her part, letting her voice tremble just slightly. I thought I was just tired. Lydia leaned forward, her expression softening into something almost maternal. Oh, sweetheart, she murmured, placing a hand gently over Elena's wrist. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Pregnancy can accelerate these things, especially with your family history. Elena froze. My family history? Lydia's smile didn't waver. Your father. The stress he went through before he passed. It's not uncommon for these things to carry over. That was a lie. A clean, deliberate lie. Elena's father had been many things, but unstable wasn't one of them. Lydia knew that. She had known him for years, which meant this wasn't concern. This was strategy. Adrian shifted in his seat, his fork scraping faintly against the plate. We've already talked to someone, he said. A specialist, just to be safe. Elena's pulse spiked, but she kept her expression blank. A specialist, she repeated. Yes, Lydia answered smoothly before Adrian could. A very discreet one. He'll evaluate you, make sure everything is documented properly. It's for your protection. Protection? The word echoed in her mind like something hollow. Documented, Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lydia's hand tightened slightly around her wrist. In case you need someone to make decisions for you later. Temporarily, of course, until you recover. Elena felt the room tilt for a second. There it was. Not hidden anymore. Not subtle. They weren't just preparing for it. They were already in motion. Across the table, Adrian looked up at her, his eyes glassy, unfocused, but behind that fog, something darker flickered. Expectation, anticipation, like he was waiting for her to break. Elena lowered her gaze, letting her shoulders slump just enough to look fragile. She let her breathing turn uneven, her fingers tightening slightly against the table. I don't feel right, she whispered. Lydia's expression softened instantly, satisfaction barely hidden beneath it. Of course you don't. That's why we're here. Elena nodded slowly, forcing herself to look small, weak, exactly what they needed her to be, because now she understood the timing, the 2 weeks, the symptoms, the documentation. They weren't just watching her fall apart, they were building a case. And as Lydia's hand lingered on her wrist, Elena realized something else. Something that made her stomach turn despite everything she already knew. This wasn't just about Adrian taking control. This was about removing her entirely. From the house, from the baby's future, from everything. That night, as she lay in bed pretending to sleep, she heard Adrian's voice through the slightly open door. Low. Careful. I don't think we need 2 weeks, he murmured. She's already slipping faster than expected. A pause. Then the same woman's voice from before, faint through the speaker. No, we stick to the plan. The lawyer wants consistency. If we rush it, it won't hold. Elena's fingers curled tightly into the sheets. The lawyer, the woman, the plan. Everything was aligning. But as Adrian stepped back into the room and quietly closed the door, Elena kept her breathing steady, her body still. Because for the first time, a new thought pushed through the fear. If they needed her to last 2 more weeks, then maybe she had exactly 14 days to destroy everything they had built. And she was going to need every single one of them. The bathroom door locked with a soft click, but to Elena it sounded louder than anything that had happened that day. For the first time in weeks, she was alone. No eyes watching her, no careful voices correcting her, no hands guiding her movements like she was already incapable of making her own decisions. Just silence. She turned on the sink and let the water run, staring at her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her skin looked pale, her eyes sunk in shadows bruised beneath them. Her hair hung loosely around her shoulders, unkempt in a way Lydia would have quietly judged. 7 months pregnant, and already erased. Her hands slowly moved to her belly fingers, pressing gently as the baby shifted beneath her skin. That small movement, alive, present, real, was the only thing anchoring her to herself. They're trying to take you from me, she whispered, her voice cracking before she could stop it. The words broke something open inside her. It didn't come all at once. It wasn't dramatic. It was quieter than that, like a crack spreading through glass. Her breathing hitched, her chest tightening until it felt like something was pressing down on her from the inside. She gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles whitening, but it didn't stop it. The tears came anyway, hot, silent, relentless, not just from fear, from everything. From the way Adrian used to look at her before all of this, from the way he held her hand at their wedding, promising something she had believed without question, from the way he had placed his hand on her stomach the first time the baby kicked, smiling like it meant something real. And now he was counting down the days until she disappeared. Elena pressed her hand over her mouth, trying to contain the sound, but a broken breath slipped through anyway. Her shoulders shook as the weight of it all finally hit her, not as scattered pieces, but as one crushing truth. He had never planned to protect her. He had planned to replace her. A sharp pain pulled her back to the present, not from the baby, but from the realization itself settling into her bones with terrifying clarity. If she let them win, she wouldn't just lose her home. She would lose her child, her identity, her voice, everything. The water kept running, the sound filling the room as she slowly lifted her head again. Her reflection stared back at her, still fragile, still exhausted, but something else had surfaced now. Something colder, something steady. Elena reached for a towel and wiped her face carefully, pressing it under her eyes, smoothing her expression until nothing was left behind. No trace of the breakdown, no weakness. When she opened the drawer beneath the sink, her hand hesitated for just a second before pushing aside the neatly arranged toiletries. At the back, hidden beneath a folded cloth, was a thin envelope. She pulled it out slowly, her fingers brushing over the worn edges. She hadn't opened it since the day her father died. Back then, she hadn't needed to. Back then, she still believed her life was simple. Her father had given it to her quietly just days before he passed, his voice calm but firm. Only open it when you realize you're standing in a room where no one is on your side. At the time, she thought he was being dramatic. Now, standing in a house where every word was calculated, every look controlled, and every step monitored, she understood exactly what he meant. Elena slid her finger under the seal and opened the envelope. Inside, there were only a few pages, but as her eyes moved across the first lines, her breathing slowed, then steadied, then sharpened. Because this wasn't just a letter, it was a warning. And more importantly, it was a map. She folded the papers carefully and slipped them back into place, her movements deliberate, now controlled. When she stepped out of the bathroom, her face was calm again, soft, composed, exactly what they expected. But inside, everything had changed, because now she knew something Adrian and Lydia didn't. They thought they were building a case, but her father had already prepared her for this kind of war. And for the first time since this began, Elena wasn't just reacting anymore. She was planning. That night, as she lay beside Adrian, pretending to drift into another deep, helpless sleep, she felt the quiet shift settle into her bones. 14 days. That was what they had given her. What they didn't realize was that 14 days might be all she needed to take everything back. The next morning, Elena didn't wait for permission. She dressed slowly, deliberately choosing a soft, loose dress that made her look more fragile than she felt. Her movements were careful, slightly unsteady, just enough to match the version of her they were building. When she walked downstairs, Lydia was already in the kitchen, watching her like she had been expecting this moment. "You're up early," Lydia said, her voice light, but her eyes sharp. "I couldn't sleep," Elena replied, lowering herself into the chair, as if it took more effort than it actually did. She kept her hand on her belly, her fingers pressing gently, grounding herself in something real. Adrian walked in a few seconds later, pausing when he saw her sitting there. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face again, the fog still clinging to him in ways he couldn't quite understand. "I thought you'd still be resting," he said. Elena looked up at him, letting a faint uncertainty soften her expression. "I didn't want to forget what day it was." The words landed exactly the way she intended. Lydia's gaze shifted instantly, interest sharpening. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, his attention locking onto her, like he was reassessing something. "What do you mean?" he asked. Elena hesitated, as if searching for the answer inside her own mind. "You said we had an appointment with someone." There was a beat of silence. Then Lydia smiled. "Yes," she said smoothly. "The specialist. I was just about to remind you." Elena nodded slowly, lowering her eyes. "Maybe it's good. I don't feel right lately." The lie tasted bitter, but it worked. Adrian exhaled something like relief passing through him. "It's just to be safe," he said. We want to make sure everything is documented properly. Documented. There it was again. Elena felt it settle into place, the final piece of the structure they were building around her. Not just conversations, not just observations, paperwork, legal weight. She forced her hands to tremble slightly as she reached for her glass. Will I have to sign anything? Lydia didn't even hesitate. Just standard consent forms, she said lightly. Nothing to worry about. Elena looked down at her hands, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel real. I trust you, she whispered. And for the first time, Lydia's expression softened into something genuine. Satisfaction. Later that afternoon, Elena found the moment she needed. Adrian was in his office door, half closed, speaking in that same low voice again. Lydia had stepped out for groceries. The house, for once, felt like it was holding its breath. Elena moved quietly down the hallway, her steps slow but controlled. She stopped just outside the door, her phone already in her hand recording. I can get her to sign sooner. Adrian was saying, his voice strained, impatience creeping in. She's already asking about it. She knows something's wrong with her. A pause. Then the woman's voice again. Clearer this time. You don't rush this, she said firmly. The court won't accept it if it looks forced. We need her compliant. Willing. Elena's heart pounded, but her hand stayed steady. And the transfer? Adrian asked. It's already drafted, the woman replied. Once she's declared temporarily incompetent, you'll have full control. The estate, the accounts, everything. Everything. Elena felt the word echo through her, louder than anything else. Then Adrian spoke again, his voice dropping lower, and after another pause. Shorter this time. We'll talk about that when she's out of the way. Out of the way. Not protected. Not cared for. Removed. Elena stepped back quietly, her breath caught in her throat as she slipped away from the door. Her chest felt tight, not from panic, but from something colder settling into place. She had been right. This wasn't just about control. This was about erasing her completely. Back in her room, she locked the door and replayed the recording once, her expression unreadable as every word confirmed what she already knew. Then she opened her father's letter again. This time she read it differently, not as a daughter, but as someone preparing for war, because now she understood the full timeline. The appointment, the signatures, the transfer. They weren't waiting anymore. They were accelerating. And if they were ready to move forward, then she had to move faster. That evening, as she sat across from Adrian again, watching him struggle to focus, watching Lydia observe her like a project nearing completion, Elena felt something shift deep inside her. Not fear, not anger, precision. Because now she knew exactly what they needed from her, and exactly when they planned to take it. All she had to do was give it to them, but on her terms. And when Adrian reached for her hand that night, squeezing it gently as if he still cared, Elena didn't pull away. She let him believe it, because in just a few days, he was going to sign his own downfall without even realizing it. The appointment was set for Thursday morning. Elena didn't ask questions. She didn't resist. She let Lydia dress her in something soft and pale, something that made her look smaller, weaker, like someone who needed help standing upright. Every detail was intentional, and Elena followed along, letting them shape the image they wanted the world to see. By the time they arrived, the building didn't feel like a clinic. It felt like a decision already made. The office was quiet, almost too quiet, with neutral walls and soft lighting that made everything feel distant and unreal. Elena sat between Adrian and Lydia, her hands resting on her lap fingers, loosely intertwined, her gaze slightly unfocused. She didn't have to fake it much anymore. Not after everything she had seen. The doctor, Dr. Harlow, entered with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. He greeted Adrian first, then Lydia. Elena last. Mrs. Carter, he said gently, taking a seat across from her. I understand you've been experiencing some confusion lately. Elena blinked slowly, as if processing the question took effort. I think so. Adrian leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. She's been forgetting things, repeating herself, losing track of time. Lydia nodded beside him, her expression carefully concerned. It's been getting worse. Elena lowered her gaze, her shoulders curling inward just slightly. I don't feel like myself, she whispered. The words were true, just not in the way they thought. Dr. Harlow scribbled something on his pad, his pen moving quickly, efficiently. "We'll just go through a few standard evaluations," he said. "Nothing complicated. The questions began simply enough. Names, dates, places." Elena answered slowly, sometimes correctly, sometimes not. She let hesitation linger where it needed to. Let doubt creep into her voice at just the right moments. She watched him write. Not everything. Just enough. After 30 minutes, he leaned back in his chair, glancing briefly at Adrian before turning back to Elena. "I'd like to run a more formal assessment," he said, "just to be thorough. It will also require a temporary consent form allowing your husband to assist in managing certain decisions while we complete the evaluation." There it was, not hidden, not softened, placed directly in front of her. Lydia reached into her bag, immediately pulling out a folder, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. She slid it across the desk toward Elena, her hand steady. "It's just temporary," she said, her voice warm. "Until you feel better." Elena stared at the papers, her name printed neatly at the top, lines waiting for her signature. Her chest rose slowly, deliberately, as if the weight of the decision pressed down on her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the pen. Adrian watched her closely, too closely. His eyes weren't soft anymore. Not here. Not now. They were sharp, expecting, waiting. Elena let the pen hover over the paper, her breathing uneven, her gaze unfocused as she whispered, "What if I don't get better?" Lydia's hand settled gently over hers. "You will," she said softly. "But until then, you need someone you can trust." Elena's lips parted slightly, her expression fragile. "I trust you," she murmured. And then she signed, slowly, carefully, exactly where they wanted her to. The pen moved across the page with quiet finality. Adrian exhaled. Lydia smiled. Dr. Harlow nodded, one satisfied. To them it was done. But Elena didn't look up right away. She let her hand rest on the paper for a second longer, her fingers brushing over the signature she had just written. Because what they didn't know was that this wasn't the first document she had signed that week, and this one wasn't the one that mattered. The silence in the room broke before Elena even lifted her head. Dr. Harlow was the first to notice it. He had been flipping through the signed document, his pen tapping lightly against the page, when his expression shifted just slightly, but enough. His eyes paused on a section, then moved back, reading it again more carefully this time. Lydia's smile didn't fade at first. She sat back in her chair, already satisfied, already certain the outcome was secured. Adrian leaned forward, his hand resting on the edge of the desk, watching the doctor like a man waiting for confirmation of victory. "What is it?" Adrian asked. Dr. Harlow didn't answer immediately. He reached for another document, in the folder, one that Lydia hadn't placed there. One that hadn't been there a second ago. Elena finally looked up. Her eyes were clear, completely clear. "I think," the doctor said slowly, his voice shifting into something far more cautious. "We need to clarify something before proceeding." Lydia frowned. "There's nothing to clarify." She signed. "Yes," he said, tapping the page. "But this consent form, it's not granting authority, it's revoking it." The room froze. Adrian blinked. What Elena sat up straighter now, her shoulders no longer slumped, her posture no longer fragile. The tremor in her hands was gone. So was the confusion in her eyes. "That's not possible," Lydia said sharply, reaching for the document. "I prepared that myself." "You prepared a version," Elena said quietly. Her voice didn't shake. "Not anymore. But you never checked the final print." Lydia's fingers tightened around the paper as she scanned it, her face draining of color line by line. Adrian leaned in beside her, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker. "No," he muttered. "No, this isn't." "It is," Elena said. She placed her hand gently over her belly, grounding herself as she continued. "The document I signed transfers temporary medical authority to an independent trustee. Not to you." Adrian's head snapped toward her. "What are you talking about, Elijah Grant Drive?" Harlow read from the page. "Licensed fiduciary. Appointed 3 days ago." Lydia looked up, her composure cracking for the first time. "You don't even know anyone by that name." Elena held her gaze. "My father did." That was the moment everything collapsed. The room wasn't quiet anymore. Adrian was already on his feet, pacing, his voice rising, unraveling as fast as his control had been slipping all week. Lydia tried to speak over him, her words sharp, defensive, desperate, but it didn't matter, because it wasn't their decision anymore. Elena reached into her bag and placed her phone on the table. "Before you say anything else," she said calmly, "you might want to listen to this." She pressed play. Adrian's voice filled the room, clear, undeniable, talking about the transfer, about her decline, about being out of the way. Then the woman's voice, the plan, the timeline, the truth. Dr. Harlow's expression hardened with every second. By the time the recording ended, the air in the room felt completely different, heavy, final. "This consultation is over," he said firmly, standing, "and I strongly advise you both to seek legal counsel." Lydia didn't argue this time. She couldn't. Outside, the sunlight felt unreal. Elena stood on the steps of the building, breathing it in slowly, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Adrian's voice echoed faintly behind her, still arguing, still trying to salvage something that no longer existed. But she didn't turn back. Not once. The investigation didn't take long after that. The recordings, the documents, the timeline. It was too clean, too deliberate to ignore. Adrian's control unraveled in court the same way it had in that office, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to defend. Lydia lost her footing just as quickly. The house, the influence, the carefully built image. It all slipped through her hands when the truth came out. Not in one dramatic moment, but in quiet, undeniable facts that left no room for her version of the story. The other woman disappeared before she could be questioned. But it didn't matter. Elena didn't need her. Weeks later, the hospital room was quiet in a different way. Not heavy, not controlled. Peaceful. Elena lay back against the pillows, exhausted but steady, her newborn resting against her chest. The baby's small breaths rose and fell in a rhythm that felt more real than anything she had lived through in that house. For the first time in months, there was no performance. No watching eyes. No one waiting for her to break. She looked down at her child, her fingers brushing gently against soft skin, and something inside her finally loosened. Not just relief, freedom. Adrian had thought he was taking everything from her, her mind, her voice, her future. But in the end, he hadn't understood the one thing that mattered. She had never been as fragile as he believed, and the moment she stopped pretending, he never stood a chance. Elena closed her eyes for a second, letting the quiet settle around her, knowing this wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of everything he had tried to take. If you've ever felt like someone was rewriting your story while you were still living it, maybe this is your reminder that you can take it back. I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what moment made you realize the truth in your own life.